The humans starved so alien kids could eat. Now their sister calls him Commander. The mess hall was loud, but Daniel barely heard anything. The sound of metal trays clattering and boots scraping the floor faded into the background as he stared at the small bowl of soup in front of him. The liquid was thin, almost like water, with a few floating pieces of dried vegetables. It wasn't much, but on this cold mining colony, food was gold. And every spoonful meant the difference between working another day or collapsing in the tunnels. Across the table sat 3 alien children, their big eyes darting between their own empty bowls and Daniel's small portion. Their sister Lyra sat beside them, her back straight and her jaw tight. She tried to hide their hunger, but the way her youngest brother's hands trembled gave it away. Daniel could see the blue tint around their lips, a sign they hadn't eaten properly in days. The storm outside had been raging for a week now, cutting off every supply ship that usually brought food. People were already getting desperate, and fights in the ration line had become common. Daniel knew he might not get another meal for a long time, but something in the children's eyes made his stomach ache for a different reason. Without saying a word, he pushed the bowl across the table. The youngest boy looked up in surprise. Then at Lyra, she hesitated, her sharp gaze narrowing at Daniel as if she was searching for the trap hidden in his kindness. But the hunger in her brothers was stronger than her suspicion. She nodded slightly, and they grabbed the bowl. Eating fast, almost spilling the soup in their rush, Daniel leaned back, his hands resting on his knees. He tried not to think about the hollow feeling in his own stomach. Hunger had a way of making you selfish, but not today. He'd worked the mines long enough to know that sometimes surviving wasn't about feeding yourself, it was about making sure someone else made it to tomorrow. From the corner of his eye, he saw a group of workers watching. Some shook their heads, thinking he was a fool. Others looked away, pretending not to notice. On this colony, generosity was rare. It didn't earn you respect, it earned you trouble. When the children finished, they licked the bowl clean, every drop gone. Lyra set it back on the table, still eyeing Daniel like she couldn't understand him. She opened her mouth, maybe to ask why, but instead closed it again and stood. She herded her brothers away without a single thank you. Daniel didn't mind. He hadn't done it for gratitude. He stood and walked toward the exit, feeling the icy air hit his face the moment the mess hall doors opened. Outside, the wind howled, carrying fine shards of ice that stung his skin. The sky was a swirling wall of gray and white. The storm wasn't letting up anytime soon. He made his way to the barracks, the metal walls rattling in the wind. Inside, the air was cold and dry, barely warmer than outside. The heating unit in the corner groaned with effort, barely working. Daniel crouched down beside it, pulling a small toolkit from under his bed. If the heater failed, people would freeze before the next supply drop. His hands worked mechanically, tightening bolts and checking wires. The smell of burnt dust filled the air. He could feel the weakness in his arms now. Every movement seemed heavier than it should. His stomach growled loudly, but he ignored it. After a while, he felt eyes on him. He glanced up and saw Lyra standing in the shadows near the doorway. Her brothers weren't with her this time. She said nothing, just watched him. Daniel returned to his work, not asking her why she was there. Finally, she stepped forward. Why? She asked simply. Her voice was soft but edged with suspicion. You gave them your food? Daniel kept his eyes on the heater. Because they needed it more than I did, he said. His voice was calm, but inside, the hunger was gnawing at him like a living thing. Lyra crossed her arms, tilting her head. Nobody does that here, she said, not without wanting something back. Daniel didn't look up. Then maybe I'm nobody, he replied. The heater hummed to life, a small wave of warm air brushing over them. Daniel stood and wiped his hands on his worn jacket. He was pale, and there was a faint sway in his stance. Lyra noticed, her eyes flicked to his hands. Seeing the tremble he tried to hide, she realized then that he hadn't eaten at all. Not even after leaving the mess hall. She didn't thank him. Not yet. Gratitude was dangerous in a place where kindness could be mistaken for weakness. But, as she stepped back into the cold, she found herself glancing over her shoulder at him. Wondering who this human was and why he was different from everyone else here, Daniel sat on his bunk. Leaning against the cold wall, the rumble of the storm outside filled the silence, his stomach twisted painfully. But in a strange way, he felt lighter. Hunger could break you. But it could also show you what you were willing to give up. And tonight, Daniel had his answer. That night, the barracks were quiet except for the wind moaning outside. The dim light from the single bulb swung gently, making shadows shift along. The walls, Daniel lay on his bunk, eyes body heavy from the day's work and the hollow ache of hunger that wouldn't let him rest. His stomach felt like it was folding in on itself, but he had learned to live with it. Hunger was a companion here, not a stranger. Somewhere in the dark, he heard soft footsteps. Too light to belong to the heavy boots most workers wore, he opened his eyes and saw her Lyra standing near the far wall. Watching him, she didn't speak, only stared like she was studying an unusual creature. Daniel turned his head slightly, waiting for her to say something, but she stayed silent. Finally, she moved closer, her thin arms folded across her chest. "You didn't eat at all," she said. Her voice was low, careful, like she didn't want anyone else to hear. Daniel shrugged. Wasn't hungry. He lied. But they both knew it wasn't true. Lyra narrowed her eyes, not believing him for two. Blindly eluding him for a second, "You gave them everything," she said, meaning her brothers. "People don't do that here." Her tone wasn't gratitude. It was suspicion. As if she still couldn't understand what game he was playing. Daniel sat up slowly, his joints aching from the cold. "It's not a game," he said. "I just didn't want to see them starve." Her gaze flicked toward his face, searching for a reason. "Kindness doesn't last here," she said sharply. "It gets you killed." He gave a faint smile. "Then I'll take my chances." For a moment, she looked like she might argue. But instead, she glanced away. Her fingers twisted the edge of her worn sleeve. She was quiet for a long time. And Daniel thought she might leave instead. She reached into the folds of her coat and pulled out a small, dented food tin. She set it on the edge of his bunk. Not meeting his eyes. "It's not much," she said quickly, almost like she was ashamed. Left over from earlier. Daniel looked at it. The smell of the cold bread and thin stew inside, making his mouth water. His hands itched to grab it, but he didn't move. "You should keep it," he said. Her jaw tightened. "If you die, they'll lose the only person who's looked at them like they matter," she said. Her voice wasn't warm. It was sharp, but behind it was something else. Something closer to fear. Daniel didn't argue again. He took the tin and ate slowly. Each bite small, but tasting like a feast. Lyra watched him for a moment. Then turned to leave. She paused at the door, her back still to him. "I still don't understand you." "Human," she murmured, before slipping out into the cold. The next morning, the storm was worse. Ice coated the windows, and the air felt like knives. The workers lined up for rations, shoving each other to move forward faster. Daniel stood at the end of the line. Watching Lyra and her brothers a few steps ahead, he noticed how they stuck close together, how she kept one hand on the youngest to keep him from getting pushed aside when their turn came. The guard dropped a small portion into their hands without even looking at them. One of the bigger alien miners, a thick-shouldered man with green-gray skin, stepped forward and tried to snatch it away. The youngest boy cried out, clutching the food to his chest. Daniel was moving before he thought, shoving himself between them. "Back off," he said firmly. The bigger alien snarled and shoved him hard. Daniel stumbled but didn't go down. He caught the man's arm and pushed him away from the children. The crowd murmured, some amused, others waiting to see if Daniel would get himself beaten. The alien swung a heavy fist, and Daniel felt the impact explode against his lip. Pain flared, and the taste of blood filled his mouth. He didn't fight back, not yet, just stood there, blocking the children. His eyes locked on the man's, not from them. He said again, his voice cold. Something in his tone made the other man hesitate. A guard finally yelled for order, and the bigger alien backed off, muttering. Lyra stepped forward, her hands shaking slightly as she reached up and touched the cut on Daniel's lip. He flinched from the sting but didn't move away. She tore a strip from the edge of her scarf and pressed it against the wound. Her brothers stood behind her, watching Daniel with wide eyes. That night, when Daniel returned to his bunk, he found half a portion of bread and dried fruit sitting on the blanket. There was no note, but he didn't need one. He ate in silence, and for the first time since arriving at this frozen colony, he felt something stir inside him. Not just warmth from food, but a quiet, unspoken bond forming between him and the alien girl who still didn't trust him but had begun, maybe, to believe in him. The next morning, the cold was sharper. The kind that bit through clothes and made the air burn in your lungs. The storm had not slowed, and the supply lines were still dead. Daniel woke early, his breath visible in the dim light of the barracks. He sat up slowly, feeling the ache in his ribs from days of eating almost nothing. Around him, the other workers moved like shadows, silent and tired. Outside, the wind screamed through the narrow paths between buildings. Daniel pulled his jacket tighter and made his way toward the main square where the ration line was already forming. Lyra and her brothers were there, huddled together against the cold. The youngest clung to her coat, his small hands stiff from the frost. Daniel stayed a little behind them, his eyes scanning the crowd. Tension was high. Hunger made people dangerous. He saw the same big alien from yesterday lingering near the front, his eyes fixed on the weakest in the line. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had a bad feeling. The guards were slow today, arguing over something near the storage shed. The line shuffled forward, people muttering under their breath. Daniel's gaze never left Lyra's brothers. Then it happened. The big alien moved suddenly, shoving people aside and grabbing at the older boy's food the second it was handed over. The boy stumbled, clutching it to his chest. Daniel's body reacted before his mind did. He lunged forward, catching the attacker's arm and twisting it away from the child. The alien roared in anger, spinning to face him. A fist swung for Daniel's head, but he ducked, feeling the rush of air as it passed over him. He stepped in close, shoving the man back with all the strength he had left. "You don't touch them," Daniel said, his voice low and hard. His breath fogged between them. Like smoke, the alien grinned, showing sharp teeth. "You think you can stop me, human?" He growled. His voice was thick with mockery. Daniel didn't answer. His eyes were steady, and something in them made the alien pause for half a second. That half-second was enough for a guard to finally notice. The guard shoved between them, barking orders, and the fight broke apart. The alien gave Daniel a long, cold stare before backing off, disappearing into the crowd. Lyra was at Daniel's side immediately. Her eyes flicked over him. Searching for injuries, she spotted a scrape along his cheek where the man's knuckles had grazed him. Without a word, she pulled a clean cloth from her pocket and pressed it to the wound. Her hands were cold but gentle. Daniel didn't move. He could feel her brothers standing close, their small faces serious. "You're going to get yourself killed," she whispered, her voice sharper than the wind. "Maybe," Daniel said, "but not today." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't like his answer. But she didn't argue. Instead, she handed her brothers their food and told them to stay close. That night in the barracks, Daniel found a small package on his bunk, a chunk of bread, a strip of dried meat, and a cup of hot tea. The smell rose into the cold air, and he knew it had come from her. He sat there for a moment, staring at it. The last time he'd eaten this well was before the storms began. He ate slowly, every bite deliberate. The heat from the tea thawing something inside him that had nothing to do with the cold. He didn't see Lyra come in, but she was suddenly there, standing beside his bunk. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked quietly. "They're not your family. You don't owe us anything." Daniel looked up at her, the steam from the tea curling between them. "Maybe not," he said, "but I'm not going to stand by while they're treated like nothing." Her eyes softened just a little, but only for a moment. She shook her head and turned to go. At the doorway, she hesitated. "You keep this up, and people will start following you," she said, "and when that happens, you can't turn your back on them." When she was gone, Daniel sat in the silence, the tea cooling in his hands. He knew she was right. He could already feel it, the stares in the mess hall, the way some of the younger workers stepped aside when he passed. Something was changing, and it wasn't just between him and her. It was the first spark of something bigger, something dangerous. And he didn't know yet if it would save them or destroy them. The storm was still raging, but inside the colony, something else was building unrest. The food was almost gone, and the guards were getting sloppy. Daniel could feel the tension in the air like static before a lightning strike. People whispered in corners, glancing toward the locked storage room where the last supplies were kept. He didn't need to hear every word to know what they were. Planning, if those supplies were raided, the weakest, the children, the sick, would be the first to die. He was fixing a broken lamp near the mess hall when Lyra came to him. Her face was pale, eyes sharp with worry. "They're going to take it tonight," she said without preamble. "A group of miners, 10, maybe more." Her voice was low, but there was an urgency in it that made him set his tools down instantly. Daniel didn't waste time asking how she knew. He just nodded. "Get your brothers somewhere safe," he said, "then meet me at the storage building." The wind outside was vicious, whipping snow and ice into his face as he crossed the yard. The storage building stood like a shadow in the storm, its heavy door locked with a thick steel latch. Daniel stood in front of it, his jacket pulled tight, his boots sinking into the snow. He could feel the weight of what was coming, one by one. Figures emerged from the swirling white, their shapes blurry at first. Then sharp miners with hard eyes and empty stomachs. Some carried pipes, others just their bare hands clenched into fists. They stopped when they saw him standing there. "Move, human," one of them called, his voice rough from the cold. "We're taking what's ours." Daniel shook his head slowly. "If you do this, people will die," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried over the wind. "Not just the ones who don't eat tonight. The guards will retaliate. And they won't care who gets hurt." A tall miner stepped forward, his breath clouding in the icy air. "We're already dying," he spat. "Better to fight than starve." Daniel took a single step closer, his eyes locked on the man's. "Fighting each other won't keep you alive," he said. "Working together might." There was movement behind him, and Lyra appeared with her brothers, not hiding, not running, standing beside him. Her small frame was rigid, her jaw set. Her presence made some of the crowd hesitate, especially those who'd seen him defend her before. "You going to stop all of us?" Another voice challenged from the back. Daniel didn't blink. "If I have to," he said simply. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. And something in the way he said it made the air between them feel heavier. For a long moment, no one moved. The storm roared around them, drowning the sound of shallow breaths and shifting boots. Finally, one of the miners muttered something under his breath and stepped back. A few followed, then more. until the group thinned into the swirling snow. Lyra didn't take her eyes off the last one leaving. Only when the yard was empty did she turn to Daniel. Her lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "Commander," she said, almost teasing, but with a note of respect he hadn't heard from her before. The word lingered in the air like a spark. And Daniel knew it wasn't going away. It wasn't just her, others had heard it too. And he could already see it in their faces when they passed him later. A new kind of look, not suspicion or pity, but expectation. That night in the barracks, Daniel lay awake, listening to the storm. He knew the fight had only been delayed. The real battle wasn't against hunger or cold. It was against the fear that made people turn on each other. And now, whether he wanted it or not, they were looking to him to lead. The cold had settled into Daniel's bones, making every step feel heavier. The storm outside had not stopped for more than a few hours and weeks, and the food situation was worse than ever. Each morning he woke weaker than the last, his ribs sharp against his skin, his breath shallow, but every time the rations came, he still made sure Lyra's brothers had theirs before he even thought of touching his own. This time, when Lyra tried to hand him her portion, he pushed it back toward her without looking up. "A commander eats last," he said quietly. The words came out like an old rule, one he didn't even remember learning. Her face tightened, frustration flashing in her eyes. "And what happens when the commander is too weak to stand?" She shot back. He didn't answer, just kept repairing the cracked heater pipe in the corner. His fingers trembled from hunger, but he forced them steady. The warmth from the pipe spread into the air, but it didn't reach the ache inside him. By midday, the air in the barracks felt heavier than usual. Daniel sat on his bunk, rubbing his temples. His vision blurred for a moment, and the room tilted. He barely caught himself before falling. Lyra was suddenly there, her hands gripping his shoulders. "You're burning up," she said. But her voice wasn't angry now. It was scared. "I'm fine," Daniel muttered, trying to pull away, but his body betrayed him. His legs buckled when he stood, and she caught him before he hit the floor. "You're not fine," she said sharply. "You're killing yourself." The others in the barracks were watching, some with pity, some with a kind of distant respect reserved for those who made sacrifices they could never make themselves. Lyra didn't care about their stares. She half-dragged, half-guided Daniel to his bunk and forced him to sit. Her brothers appeared moments later, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a mix of their own saved rations, bread, dried roots, even a strip of salted meat. Daniel stared at it, guilt and gratitude twisting together in his chest. "This is yours," he said, his voice low. "Not anymore." Lyra replied, "If you die, we lose more than just a man who gave us food." She glanced around at the others watching. "We lose the only person here who makes people think twice before doing something stupid." He looked at her, and for a moment, the storm outside felt far away. She wasn't just giving him food, she was making sure he understood that his life mattered. Not just to her and her brothers, but to the fragile balance keeping this place from falling apart. That night, Daniel ate without argument. His body welcomed the food like a drowning man breaking the surface for air. Lyra sat beside him, not speaking, but her presence felt like a shield. The others pretended not to notice, but more than once. He caught them glancing over. It wasn't just kindness anymore. It was something stronger, something binding. And though Daniel would never admit it aloud, the thought of leaving them, of leaving her, had started to feel impossible. The storm finally broke, not with sunlight, but with a pale gray sky, and winds that had slowed to a restless whisper. For the first time in weeks, the colony speakers crackled to life, announcing an emergency supply drop was inbound. The words spread like fire, and within minutes, the whole settlement was moving toward the landing yard. Daniel walked slower than the rest. his legs still weak, but his eyes were sharp. He could already hear the tone in people's voices, excitement mixed with desperation. The crates that were coming wouldn't be enough for everyone to feast, not even close, and hunger had a way of turning friends into enemies in seconds. The dropship descended through the clouds, its engine sending ripples through the icy air. It touched down hard, kicking up a storm of snow. Guards rushed forward to unload the metal crates, their breath misting in the cold. The crowd pressed in, shouts rising, hands reaching for food that hadn't even been opened yet. Daniel saw the push starting near the front, elbows jabbing, boots stomping, and knew if it kept going, the first few would take everything, and the rest would be left with nothing. He stepped forward, planting himself between the crates and the crowd. "Back up," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chaos. Some ignored him. Trying to push past, he grabbed one by the arm, not roughly, but firmly, and shoved him back a step. "We do this in order," Daniel said. "The weakest first, the sick, the children who put you in charge." Someone shouted from the side. Daniel didn't look at them. "You did," he replied evenly. "Every time you let me stand in front when things got bad." That made the front line pause, just for a moment, but it was enough for Lyra to appear. At his side, a stick gripped tightly in her hands. Her brothers were just behind her. She looked at the crowd with a glare sharper than the wind. And a few people actually stepped back. The guards didn't stop him. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe they were just tired, but they let him call out names, starting with the old miner who could barely stand, then a mother carrying a feverish child. The people moved slowly, and no one tried to cut ahead when they passed under Daniel's stare. By the time the crates were half empty, the worst of the crowd had settled. The angry shouting faded to murmurs, and the line moved with tense order. Daniel kept his place until the last small ration was given out. Only then did he take his own portion, a small bag of grain and a strip of dried meat. When it was over, people lingered, not rushing off. Their eyes followed him, some nodding slightly before leaving. It wasn't cheering, it wasn't thanks, but it was something heavier: acceptance, trust. Lyra stood beside him, her breath visible in the cold. "They listened," she said softly, almost like she didn't. "Believe it? They'll keep listening," Daniel replied, his voice steady. "As long as I give them a reason to." She tilted her head, her eyes searching his face. "Then, I guess you really are the commander now," she said. "And this time?" There was no teasing in her voice at all. The sky over the colony was still gray, but the air had changed. The worst of the hunger was over. The supply ships were making regular runs again, and the sharp edge of desperation had begun to dull. Yet Daniel noticed something. People still glanced his way before they made decisions, still watched him when arguments broke out, still fell silent when his voice cut through the noise. That evening, the mess hall was fuller than it had been in months. The smell of hot stew and fresh bread filled the air. Daniel sat at one of the long metal tables, his portion in front of him. He hadn't eaten yet, waiting until the younger miners and the children had theirs. Old habits didn't fade easily. He felt movement beside him and turned to see Lyra placing her bowl down next to his. Her brothers slid onto the bench across from them, grinning through mouths already full. The warmth in the air wasn't just from the food. It was in the way people laughed again, in the way no one seemed afraid to sit too close. Halfway through the meal, the hall doors opened and a group of miners walked in. Not loud, not aggressive, just quiet, carrying something. Daniel frowned until he saw it was a rough wooden crate. Inside were scraps of cloth, bits of polished metal, and a battered old mug. They set it down on the table in front of him. One of the older workers cleared his throat. "We took a vote," he said, his voice low but carrying, "for what you've done here. For the fights you've stopped. For the food you've given up. We figure you've earned this." He pulled out the mug, cleaned and patched and set. It in front of Daniel, it was nothing fancy, just a mug, but on this colony where everything was rationed and owned by the company. Having something of your own was rare, the man continued. From now on, when we need someone to speak, for us to stand in front when things turn bad. We want it to be you, Commander. The word rolled through the room like a wave, quiet at first, then stronger as more voices joined in. Commander, they said, some smiling, some serious, all of them meaning it. Daniel felt heat rise in his face. He wanted to argue, to say he wasn't a leader, but when he glanced at Lyra, she was watching him with a faint smile, her eyes steady. Her brothers sat up straighter. Pride clear on their faces, he lifted the mug slightly, the steam from his stew curling around it. Then I'll make sure it's worth the title, he said. His voice was calm, but inside he felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. Not as a burden, but as a promise. The hall filled with the sound of spoons, scraping bowls, and low conversation. But under it all was something unspoken, a shared understanding. The storms would come again. The hunger might return, but now they had someone to stand at the front. Someone who had already proved he would starve before letting a child go without, and in that moment, surrounded by the people who had once been strangers. Daniel finally realized the truth. He hadn't just saved them, they had saved him too.